amazingly, actually, the first time I saw Prabhupada was on television, which you might think would sort of distance him somewhat, but I really felt his presence. I had no idea who it was. He came on this late night program. This is back in 1969. It was just 4 days, I later learned, after he arrived in the country. They were staying at John Lennon's house, and Mukunda had managed to organize this interview. So late in the evening, I used to sit every day in the evening if I was around with my father. I was staying with him at the time. And there would be famous people like politicians, playwrights, authors, that kind of a person, would be submitted to an interview by a fairly assertive presenter. Yeah. So suddenly, in the chair, this is sort of 10:30 at night, was this elderly Indian monk. And I thought, wow, what an amazing looking person. Who can that possibly be? And Tony Bilbo, the presenter, he began to question this man. He said, I recall it pretty well, somehow it stuck in my mind. He said, what's brought you here to this country? And this elderly man said, I've come to teach about God, straight off the bat. And immediately I thought, that's interesting, because I had been taught about God all my life, you know, by monks. And they had assured me that I didn't need to hear about God from anyone else. You know, these were Catholic monks, and they could tell me everything I needed to know. So I thought, this is going to be interesting. I wonder what he's going to say. So the interviewer said to him, is this the same God that we already know about in this country? You know, or is it some other God? And this man, this elderly, wise Indian man, he said, it's the same God that I'm come to speak of. God has many names, but God is one. So I was intrigued. And then the elderly man said, I think he said, the interviewer probably asked him next, so what are you teaching? And this elderly Indian man said, I am teaching how you can see God and speak with God, just as I am speaking with you, face to face. And I thought, that sounded amazing. And then the next question was, so what is it, what's your method? How can we do this? So then the elderly Indian man said, you simply sing the names of God. And I thought, it can't be that simple. You know, and my father was sitting next to me, and I said to him, what did he say? Did he say you just sing? And my father said, I don't know, I couldn't, because his accent was very strong. So I was intrigued, and then the interviewer said, well, would you like to demonstrate? At which, until that time, this saintly man had looked very serious, grave, you know. And suddenly his face just lit up with this huge smile and sparkling energy, which really captured me. And he said, I would love to. And so they got up and walked across the studio where there were some devotees, and they were sitting on the floor. And this monk sat on the floor with them. And in retrospect, I realized I don't think I've ever seen anyone sit on a television studio floor, before or since. So they sat on the floor, and the man went, he interviewed at least one of them, and I do remember very clearly it was Shamsundar. He had that tilak that went from here all the way to there, you know, with a shiny shaven pate. And I thought to myself, gosh, I admire that young man, a bit older than me, but I admire that man and these people. I can see they've got something really special. And the thought that occurred to me was, I could never do what they're doing. I could tell it was really serious, but I would love to. aspire to something like that. So then they began to sing. And, Prabhupada had his kartals, and Shamsundar had his Esiraj, and Yamuna probably was the one that was singing, I don't recall, you have the harmonium, and Mukunda had his tambura and the mridanga. It was such a beautiful sound. So they chanted one round of the Mahamantra. As soon as I heard the sound, I thought, that is right. You just have to sing. It all made perfect sense. It just connected completely with me. And I was ready to sit there for hours listening, but immediately the program ended. The credits started to scroll down, and it faded out. And I turned to my father and I said, wasn't that amazing? And my father said, no. So I learned from that. I learned this amazing presence which Prabhupada was able to project, across a screen. I didn't know if I would ever meet him again. I don't remember what my thoughts were on that subject, but I did think I would like to be like that young man that was questioned. And I formed some kind of an appreciation of the chanting. And of course, a few weeks later, within a week or two from then, it was in the charts, the Hare Krishna mantra was being sung on the radio all the time. Yeah. So that was my first encounter with Prabhupada. The main impression I had of course, I didn't know he was Prabhupada, but the main impression I had of this man was that he was 100% genuine. He really knew what he was, when he was speaking about God, I knew I've got to hear what this man says. Prabhupada came to England for the second time. He returned to England in the summer of '71. So I was at the airport, and the impression was overwhelming because he shone. He had a brilliant aura, sort of a golden. It's a mystical thing, isn't it? But there was a golden light that just shone, and yet physically he was small, and yet he was the most powerful presence in the whole airport, and he just drifted. He didn't seem to walk. He seemed, that's how my memory is, like he just floated through. So it created a very powerful impression of being, I would say, just being blessed. Being blessed. By that time I had been in the temple for 9 months, so I had read and heard so much about Prabhupada. I think it's worth saying that, when I joined the temple, devotees like Yamuna, Mukunda, Shamsundar, Gurudas, Malati, they were talking about Prabhupada all the time. They were totally in love with him. So although I hadn't met him I didn't get to meet him until 9 months later, I had already imbibed a deep sense of love. And always his tapes were playing. Prabhupada heard news, apparently, from India that Tamal or Jayapataka had acquired that strip of land that Prabhupada was pushing them to get in Mayapur. He had just bought the land. They'd signed a contract for the land. And so somehow or another, Shamsundar, or I don't know quite how, but anyway, word had reached Prabhupada that I knew something about architecture. So I was called to Prabhupada's room. It was Shamsundar introduced me to Prabhupada. I already had my name, Ranchor. I'd had it for sort of 6 months by then. And Prabhupada said, oh, where are you from? Where were you born? So I said, well, north of England, Prabhupada. He said, oh, Scotland? I said, no. Like Yorkshire, But Prabhupada immediately wanted to get to know me. I was too young, I guess, to appreciate the significance of that, but I thought it was very personal, you know. He wanted to have an interaction with me. And then began several days of talks and discussions in Prabhupada's room about what he wanted in Mayapur. He began describing, you know, he wanted this big temple. First of all, he wanted some residential blocks. That was the first thing that needed to be built where devotees could live. And he gave, you know, quite detailed instructions what he wanted. And then he said 4 of those, and then a big temple. So for the next couple of weeks, I was making drawings. Prabhupada wanted a very large temple. Now, around this time, our godbrother Narayan arrived from America. He had somehow been, you know, added to the team that was going to go with Prabhupada to India because he was a construction man. So I was told to work with him, and that was, shall we say, it was an interesting experience. But I'm not here to talk about that. However, Narayan took charge of me. And I remember once, I mean, we were working hard, long hours, late into the night to try to get everything ready for Prabhupada because time was up. He wanted a finished set of drawings to take with him, you know, to India. So on one occasion, Narayan said, come on, let's go down to see Prabhupada. It was in the morning after breakfast, and so in we went. And Narayan said, he's tired, Prabhupada. He's tired, which I was. So then Prabhupada said, oh? And he looked at me, he said, are you tired? I said, no, Prabhupada. So then Prabhupada turned to Narayan and he said, you are tired. Atmanam manyate jagat. You know, what's in your mind, you're thinking, what you're feeling, you're thinking he's feeling. He's not tired. So I was working flat out to make these drawings. And on one occasion, because I had got behind on my rounds, come late in the evening, I stood out, I had all these rounds to chant. So I quietly let myself out the front door and off I went into the night with my beads. And it was one of those things where I was so tired, I was walking, you know, into lampposts. I don't know if you ever had that experience. And I was walking around the streets in central London and everything was quiet. In those days, London was asleep. I got back to the street where the temple is, right in front of the British Museum, Bury Place, at about 1 in the morning. And everything was quiet. But when I turned into the street, I heard, from the end of the street, I could hear Prabhupada's voice. And I saw that his lights were on. He occupied the room on the first floor above the temple room. And his windows looked out onto the main street. All his lights were on, bright, shining into the night. And his window was open. And I could hear his voice. And I realized he's dictating into, you know, he's translating the Bhagavad-gita, commenting on the Bhagavad-gita. So immediately I felt nervous, actually. Immediately I felt nervous because I didn't want him to know that I was out late at night, you know. So I sort of tiptoed to the front door, which was open. We never locked it in those days. And I tried to be as quiet as I could going up the stairs. I had to go past his landing and the stairs were creaking. And I thought, God, I really don't want him to know. But when I got outside his door, I had to just sit there and listen. So I sat outside his door. And the whole building, you know, you could hear the heavy breathing, occasional kind of snoring, and so everyone was asleep. And Prabhupada was saying a few words and there was a click. And a few more words and a click. A few more words and so on. Sometimes a long pause and then a lot of words. And I had this amazing realization that when everyone else was asleep, he was awake and he was speaking not just to the dictaphone, it really felt like he was speaking, to the world. I'm sure that's what he felt as well. He was speaking to the world. Some of the interesting wishes Prabhupada had, for Mayapur, it was mainly to do with the construction, because that's what I was helping with. He did want the temple very big. I know, the temple that has been built there is colossal. Kind of difficult for me. I like things to be, human scale. But Prabhupada wanted it. I have no doubt about that. He wanted something colossal. We used to go during this period with Prabhupada every morning around Russell Square, which was a nearby square where he liked to walk. One morning I was sitting in the temple room chanting my japa, and Shamsundar stuck his head in the door and said, "Does anyone want to come?" Oh, he said to me, "Come and walk with Prabhupada. We want you to be there because I'm part of the team." And so I dashed out onto the front doorstep, and there was Prabhupada with Shamsundar and Pradyumna, mainly, and one or two others. And I had this very thin kurta that had been donated, by a Hindu. It was like see-through. And Prabhupada said, "You will be cold." It was 6 o'clock in the morning. I said, no, Prabhupada, I'm not cold. and he said, "Put on something warmer." And I hesitated because I thought, no, then he'll leave without me. And then Prabhupada said, "That's all right. We'll wait." So I ran up, put on something else, and came down, and off we went to the square. So while we were walking around the square, Prabhupada wanted to talk, and Narayan was also one of the team. He wanted to talk about his plans. And he, over a period of several days, these conversations went on. And I remember one day, he pointed to one of the buildings around the square. He said, "How tall is that building?" So everyone looked at me because I'm the one that's supposed to know. And so I said, "Well, it's about 50 feet. So Prabhupada said, "Higher than that." And so next day, there's one large hotel on Russell Square called Russell Hotel, and it's the tallest building. And Prabhupada pointed out, he said, "How tall is that?" I said, "Prabhupada, is about 80 feet tall." It was 8 stories. And Prabhupada said, "Higher than that." And then we carried on walking around. Then he turned around, and especially to Narayan, I think he said this, "It should be 3 times as high as that." So, yeah, Prabhupada wanted a very, very tall building. In the end, it was like he wanted it over 300 feet. That's how we ended up, yeah. And he also said some interesting things. He said, because it's a floodplain, you have to leave the first floor. The ground level should just be for storage because that will flood. All the buildings should be like that. The very first Mayapur, what we called the temple, Mayapur Chandradoya Mandir, which was the original residential block. It was not built as a temple, it was built as a residential block, and the ground floor was just open for storage. And that's where Radha and Krishna were installed, there on the ground floor. That was our temple. It was never intended to be anything. So anyhow, Prabhupada said also, we will need a raft foundation. I'd never really heard of such a thing. But the next day, an engineer who happened to be Indian, but he was a very highly qualified professional structural engineer, came and spent a couple of hours with Prabhupada. So we were sitting around, and he was saying, yes, you have to have a raft. That's the only way to build this, with columns going down into the ground, but there should be a raft. And Prabhupada had also told us, I want you to build this temple out of brick. and you should manufacture the brick locally on site. And local people, they can make the bricks, and the walls, he gave a specific dimension. He said the walls should be between 2 and 3 feet thick. You know, so we asked the engineer how thick should the brick walls be. So he did some calculation. He said, "Oh, 2'9". And Prabhupada also gave instructions, but he wanted a dome. He did say that. And he had a particular idea how he wanted a cross beams, and then another, like an umbrella, a vertical to support. That was his idea. And a lot of other things. He spoke about Krishna's palaces, as described in the Bhagavad-gita, the opulence of Krishna's palaces. He wanted something beautiful and opulent. I was living in London, and I had to come in on the train and then walk across the fields. And one morning, I got there, and the kirtan was going already. Prabhupada was on his Vyasa-san, another of these big Vyasa-sans, and the kirtan was going. And that was just such an amazing atmosphere. Oh my gosh. And Prabhupada was so appreciating the dancing. And I do remember, on this occasion, our godbrother Tribhuvanath, who once he got a mridanga around his neck and was singing, you know, he was in another world. And there he was dancing in front of Prabhupada. And he was just, you know, singing directly to Prabhupada. He had this way of singing, his head going up and down. And Prabhupada was just gazing with laughter and joy into Tribhuvanath's eyes. It was this wonderful connection. And we all knew. There were certain Prabhupada's, certain of his devotees that really drew his special affection. In fact, that summer, we were sitting on the lawn. Prabhupada used to sit on the lawn, and on that occasion he had Shrita Kirti was his servant, reading from the Chaitanya Charitamrita. The full versions were not published, but there was a preliminary chapter, I think, just one sample chapter. The Lord in 5 Features, it was called. And so he was reading from that. The Prabhupada was listening. And then one of the devotees there, Yogeshwara, who's from New York, he put his hand up and he said, "Prabhupada," the text had just said something about Lord Chaitanya's mercy being causeless. And he said, "Prabhupada, we know that Lord Chaitanya's mercy is causeless, but still, is there some, you know, some reason why we've got it, this causeless mercy, we have received this? And, you know, who gets to receive it if it's causeless?" And Prabhupada said, "Simply, Krishna likes you. Yeah. Krishna likes you, so you've got the special mercy. And if Krishna does not like you," yeah, he said that. Yeah, well, during that first year, when Prabhupada was lecturing, you know, we got to ask questions. So one time I was sitting quite close. At the end, I asked, I said, and I had just received my second initiation. I said, "Prabhupada, is it true that when we receive initiation, that our karma is completely taken away?" And Prabhupada immediately said, "Yes, but you must be ruled by your guru. Then there is no karma." My heart started to beat, you know, I thought, ooh, okay. Because, you know, when he was up high above me, the Vyasa-san was like another of Narayan's creations. He built this Vyasa-san for Trafalgar Square because we were hoping that Prabhupada would be with us for Rath Yatra, but in fact he came late for Rath Yatra. So this Vyasa-san filled the whole back of the temple room. It was enormous, and I knew it was too big. As soon as Prabhupada, he stepped into the room, he saw it, he said, "It is too big." I thought Narayana was right there, and I thought, there, you see? So Prabhupada was very high on the Vyasa-san, and I was, sitting on the floor below. So when he said, "You must be ruled by the Guru who is looking down at me, you must be ruled by the Guru." So I've never forgotten that. I suppose it's a lifelong journey, lifelong work to really embrace that. Not in a disciplinarian way, but actually it should be really based on love. In his room at the manor, there was room for quite a number of guests. You could have 30 or 40 comfortably. So sometimes it used to get quite full, and anyone could go in the afternoon. You could just go in and sit. And once or twice, I was there listening to Prabhupada. One time, an Indian Swami, and he was a Mayavadi for sure, came with one or two of his retinue to see Prabhupada. And I entered, I think, during the proceedings, and I sat down. There were not so many of us there. And so I could see you could sense from the atmosphere that Prabhupada hadn't really connected with this man and didn't particularly want to. So, but he had given a pile of brochures. He'd given to Prabhupada some of his literature. So after he left the room, Prabhupada said to his servant, "Distribute these. Everyone should have one." Right. So each of us was sitting there with our booklet, and then Prabhupada said, "Now, take the prasadam and give everyone prasadam, and the book can be the plate." So we all ate whatever it was, some sweets probably, or fruit, and the book was our plate. Yeah. Another time in Prabhupada's room, there was quite a crowd of people, and a question was put. And Prabhupada just looked at me and said, "You answer." So I was put on the spot. And I just remember saying, well, there was a couple of things I said. I said, well, this material world is a place of happiness and distress. Immediately Prabhupada said, "No, only distress." Which of course has stayed with me, because I am very much the person who wants to see the happiness as well as the distress, but I always remember that Prabhupada told me it's not happiness, it's all distress. And of course at a deeper level I know that's true. But I like to see the positive too. So then anyway, on this same occasion, maybe there was a second question and Prabhupada had me answer again, so I said, when you chant Krishna's names, you approach Krishna. And Prabhupada immediately interrupted and said, "No, when you chant Krishna's name, you are with Krishna." So I'm very grateful that Prabhupada, on those two occasions, he gave me some core corrections, which have stayed with me. Yeah. And then I thought, now's my chance. I was just alone with Prabhupada. I have some questions. It was on my mind a lot at that time. I had this preaching centre in North London, but I also felt a real pull to go back to Manchester, where I had run a temple before. And I was not sure. So I said, Prabhupada, in Krishna's service, when there is a choice of two different things, how do we choose? Prabhupada immediately said, choice? You have no choice. You do what Krishna gives you. And so there I was in Prabhupada's room, he told me this. And he was getting ready to go out. and I was just sitting there. Prabhupada was, he called his servant, he got him putting on his chadar and so on, moving towards the door, and I said, Prabhupada, I'd heard that Prabhupada had written about in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, I think it was, he'd written about something called Prabhu Data Desh, which means the particular place or destination or task that has been given to you, Prabhu Data Desh, what your master gives you. Desh actually means land, but the instruction you have been given, and I knew that Prabhupada had given some people very specific instructions. Do this or do that. So I said, Prabhupada, do you have a special instruction for me? And Prabhupada looked at me and he just went, somehow or other, preach. That is all. Somehow or other, preach. So I carry that also with me all my life, really. Somehow or another. And Krishna may give me, it's up to Krishna, the circumstance, the setting, but I know what the task is to somehow or other share, this amazing gift. Yeah. But on Janmashtami Day itself, Prabhupada was staying at the manor. He wanted to see Radha Landaneshwara. And that was my temple. I was based in central London. I was the president at the time of the London temple. So we heard Prabhupada's coming to see Radha and Krishna. Me being the responsible person, I sort of was busy organising so many things, and I know everyone wanted to be out there seeing Prabhupada and greeting him and coming, so I thought, well, I'll do the arti, because nobody else is going to want to do that. Somebody's got to do, we'll have a special arti. Well, when Prabhupada comes in, I had it all set up. Somebody will blow the conch shell, or probably I would blow the conch shell behind the curtain, where, somebody would tell me he's here now. So I blew the, and I started, and I opened the curtain, and we had, in the temple, we had built a platform in the middle of the room, because Prabhupada was being carried, by 4 people. We made a palanquin for him. It was a chair with rods, and so I thought they'll bring it in, they'll put it on the platform, and he can have darshan. So I opened the curtain, and I didn't look. I just started doing the arti. I was looking at Krishna, and when it came, when you offer arti, and there comes a point where you're going to offer to the picture of Prabhupada, of your guru, and I knew Prabhupada was there, so I turned, expecting him to be halfway back down the temple room, but he wasn't. He was right there. I mean, I could reach out and touch him, and so I offered him, the incense. It was a very special moment. He looked into my eyes. I couldn't avoid his eyes. And he went like that. He was weeping. He was just weeping. And and kind of half smiling, looking into my eyes. And that was my farewell. Yeah. Je anilo premadana koruna prachu